Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Mind Debates. This is Adit Kapadia coming to you after 2 months, I guess. So I'm apologizing at the top of the show. A lot of people have been asking us why I haven't been doing this frequently. We were just waiting for the right time and the right guest. So, and we believe we do have both cornered this time. So together with me are my team from Mind Makers, Sunanda Vashisht and Pramod Kumar Boravalli. And we're very pleased to welcome Professor Vivek Dehejia, who is the Associate Professor of Economics at the Carleton University in Canada. Just to give a brief background about him, he did his PhD in economics in 1995, and his research areas include the study of globalization, development, and the development of India. He has also co-authored a book, Indianomics, Making Sense of Modern India, with journalist Rupa Subramania, and writes for various leading Indian newspapers. So great to have you, Professor Dehejia. Welcome to Mind Debates.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you all for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Vivek. We are really happy that you're here with us today.
Right. So just to get things started, what I wanted to know at the top of the thing, what direction do you think is the Indian economy taking in the last 2 years since Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister of India?
Well, as you know, Adit, the basic sort of story at this point is steady as she goes. The macroeconomy is sound, macro fundamentals are good, and all of the government's sort of the fiscal account, the current account, are in good shape. Inflation is in fact low and under control, and India is again is poised to be, and in fact, if it will be, and in fact already is, the fastest growing major economy in the world among all of the emerging economies and the advanced economies. So all told, the macroeconomic picture is much brighter than it was 2 years ago. A part of that, of course, is a function of the global situation. So there's always some element of good luck. Low oil prices, although they're ticking up a bit, certainly helped. And good economic management by the government has also been a factor. And of course, it's always very hard to parse those, in a quantitative way, what percent is due to which. But I think broadly, all of the factors I'd say, are well aligned, and the economy, all told, is doing pretty well.
On a lighter note, us being in Houston, we would know the impact of the oil prices a thing or two.
I think for you it's having the opposite effect, and my friends in Calgary, I think, are feeling the same effect as well.
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to come in here and thank you for giving us an overview of how you feel about the economy. I actually am not an economist, but I share your views, and I feel. But why is it that the op-ed columns are not saying the same thing? Even though we do seem to be on a strong footing, considering what this government inherited.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, which I've been thinking about myself, Sunanda, which is, why is it that there seems to be a disconnect between, an overall a good macroeconomic picture, a good economic picture, and a good record of policy reform by the government, and a somewhat negative or more than somewhat negative tone by a lot of the commentators. I would say the simplest explanation I can give you is that in many ways there were overhyped or perhaps unfair, unrealistic expectations that somehow, Mr. Modi and the government would unleash some kind of big bang, whatever that's supposed to mean. Reforms would be the next, Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan. And given the nature of the reform process in India itself, and in fact, in general, this was a completely, this expectation, if that's what it was totally out of step with reality. And therefore, when you have a record, a track record of good management of the economy, progress on the reforms agenda, we can talk more about that. In the context of a very difficult political economy, as you know, and this is something I've studied going back to my graduate work at Columbia, which you mentioned. As a general rule, you can say as a rule of thumb, that so-called big bang or shock type of reforms only happen in a time of extreme crisis. In a type of crisis as we had in 1991 when we had to go to the IMF for help and so on, in a time of crisis, the normal laws of politics can be suspended for a while, and technocrats can come and take over. As for example happened in Greece in the middle of their crisis recently. But in time of normal politics, then the laws of politics apply, and the rule of thumb. And in fact, a lot of the academic work that I've done and many others have done bears this out, that in normal times, slow and steady, gradual incremental reforms is the politically sensible way to do reforms. It doesn't make sense to try and do too much, do more than the system can deal with, to evoke a backlash and so on. So I think, so my own view is, if you have sensible and realistic expectations and an understanding of how economics operates in conjunction with the politics, then you would, I think, have a more favorable view of what we've seen in the last couple of years.
And I'm going to bring Pramod in here, but just to add something, and this I think we said it on the podcast as well last week, that or 2 weeks ago, that Prime Minister Modi, when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, you didn't see like big bang reforms or something, but it was more like him working effectively within the parameters of the existing system and doing incremental reforms like what you said. And it was more about the delivery.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry to jump in, but absolutely correct. And in fact, if you look at Mr. Modi's track record in Gujarat as the Chief Minister, it was one of being a pragmatic modernizer, making the government function better, rooting out corruption and needless red tape and bureaucracy, creating an investor and a business-friendly climate, and so on. So all of these things, were accomplished during his time in office in Gujarat, and we are seeing a very similar, pragmatic, measured, sort of tempered approach to economic reform and management at the center. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So Pramod, to bring you in, what are your initial thoughts and any questions for Vivek? Yeah.
You talked about labor reform in the past, and there's some steps, some emulation from the Rajasthan government that's been happening. But labor reform is a state subject. Different states have different ways of dealing with unions, different ways of dealing with taxation. Is there a one answer to this labor reform question, and is it tied into the job creation at all at the federal level? What can the union government do if the states are not able to enact labor reform?
So Pramod, I mean, just one minor correction. So labor and land are concurrent. And this is a key part of the approach that the Modi government has taken to the reforms agenda. If I can just take a step back and then return to your question about what do we do with labor reform, one of the insights, or I think one of the, not the insight, but the mantra or the template that the Modi government has followed is, look, that the idea that in a large, complicated, large, complex federal country, federal polity like India, also like the US or like Canada for that matter, the idea that somehow all reform must emanate from the center doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Yes, the center has to be a guiding force, and certain reforms have to come from the center. I mean, GST obviously has to be pushed by the center. But in areas of concurrent jurisdiction, which happen to include land and labor, so broadly speaking, factor market reforms, the second generation of reform, so-called, the sense is, or the understanding is, look, there is only so much the center can do here. These are politically contentious areas. Look at the way the whole attempt to reform the disastrously bad Land Acquisition Act that the government inherited from the previous Congress-led government. That, unfortunately, it was a valiant effort, but it failed in the end because of lack of control of the RS, of the House of Parliament, not just of Parliament. So that, I think that sent us, that gave feedback to the government that, look, if we tried very hard on land, we think that our land bill was better, but we simply got stymied doing this, at the center. So with labor, I think the approach was, look, let states take the lead. So Rajasthan, as you say, took the lead. Madhya Pradesh has reformed its labor laws. Gujarat has reforms in the works, and so on, perhaps Maharashtra. So the idea that for politically contentious subjects such as labor, where there's going to be pushback from labor unions and so on, vested interests, let the states be the laboratories for reform. And again, the basic lesson, and I'm saying this as a scholar who's looked at this, the basic lesson is in large federal states with overlapping jurisdictions like India, like US, Canada, Russia, and so on, that there's a lot of merit in allowing subnational jurisdictions, the states in this case in India, to be the laboratories for reform. And then those exercises, those reforms that succeed would be emulated, would be picked up by other states, would become a kind of best practice, and so on. Those that don't do so well, okay, then it tried, it didn't work. So specifically on your question with labor, that is how I see it playing out. That yes, there's an attempt to simplify and consolidate and so on labor laws from the center, but the heavy lifting on labor and land going forward is going to be done by the states.
Interesting point. Pramod, any counterpoints on this or anything to add that you had?
I think labor reform leads directly into job creation, and this has been an economy where you're stitching too many pieces back again. All of your things lead to what the federal government can really do for job growth. This is
Yeah, we had some issue with Pramod's audio, so he's just going to join back in. But yeah, now I'm going to address the major question that everyone's been waiting for. The RBI governor, and that's been like the topic of the op-ed columns for the last 72 hours or something. And I think Vivek probably had one of the best pieces on the RBI governor's exit, or Rexit, as the hashtag wars have been going on. So, Sunanda, before I come into Vivek, what did you have on this quick thing? Because I mean, just to like set the parameters of the debate, I thought personally that this whole brouhaha. I mean, sure, Raghuram Rajan did have a very good tenure as the RBI governor, a very interesting tenure. Let's put it that way. But I mean, I don't think it was the end of the world. No one is indispensable. So I don't know what was this going on.
I have to say this. I am not going to reveal my age here, but I have been around for a while, and I have not known any RBI governor attracting either appointment or them leaving the office, as in this case. I have had tough time trying to tell people that he has actually finished his term of 3 years and he is leaving. He is not being, sort of his term is not being shortened or something. But in my entire life, I have never seen any RBI governor being given, ordinary people for the matter, or op-ed column or political columnists, giving so much attention to this appointment. I don't know if we can blame Shobha Day for that. Since she is not somebody who I would trust when it comes to economy, I'm going to turn to Vivek. And actually, before we started this hangout, we were planning this. A couple of our listeners actually and viewers, they came and said that we would like to get a very honest opinion about this. We want to understand that is Rajan's exit really going to be that kind devastating to India, as has been pointed out. In your column, Vivek, you pointed out that he had a phenomenal tenure. He did very well, considering the time he took the, he took the reins of RBI. But this is also something that we have to let the elected government take a view on. So could you elaborate on that?
And before Vivek comes in, just 1 second, I just wanted to get Pramod to add his points also, so you can answer all of them together.
That's a good point, so that Vivek can.
Sure.
Pramod, any points on the RBI governor?
Well, people need to know that he had a legacy before being an RBI governor as well. It's not like he was just an RBI governor. And I think that they talk about that a little bit, and social media. Could you talk about his direct and indirect role in steering the economy out of the woodworks, especially with the monetary framework that is in place right now.
Mhm. Okay, Vivek, over to you. I would say, I thought Pramod was going to say he's too busy with Brexit, so he's not going to talk about Brexit. But anyways, the floor's
So
all yours.
yeah, no, and these are, and of course, as we said before we went on air, we didn't know that this would happen just a couple of days before we'd had this plan for some time. So yeah, I mean, I will again perhaps shamelessly put in a plug for my column in the Mint, which came out yesterday. Sanjay Baru has a terrific column today in First Post, which I would suggest that you take a look at. The basic point is this, that the RBI governor, yes, it's a kind of technocratic position, but ultimately it is answerable to the democratically elected government of the day, and that is how it works in a democracy. That is how it works in the U.S. So the Federal Reserve chairperson is not some kind of God who sits above the U.S. government. He or she in this case, is accountable in a very specific statutory sense in the U.S. To the government which appointed her. Now, in the case of this remarkable kind of outpouring of what I can only call Rajan Bhakti that we've seen both before his exit, before the Brexit so-called, and since then, is really mystifying to me. As you say, what happened was fairly simple. Dr. Rajan was appointed by the previous UPA government. He acquitted himself very well. I want to go on the record saying I'm a huge admirer both of Dr. Rajan's academic work as an economist or as a thinker about monetary policy. In fact, some of my own research has been inspired by some of what he's written and said, particularly the damaging effects of advanced economies, so-called unconventional monetary policies, the kind of zero lower bound and quantitative easing and so on the emerging economies. That's a fascinating topic that Rajan has made important contributions to. He's been a very able steward of India's monetary policy. Under his watch, and it's not purely his doing, but with the cooperation of the Ministry of Finance and the sort of technical group, the monetary policy framework agreement has come into effect. It will be administered by a monetary policy committee with 3 members appointed by the government, 3 from the RBI, with the governor himself or herself, whoever is next, having a casting vote. So in a couple of ways, in fact, ironically enough, Dr. Rajan himself has made it less idiosyncratically, a feature of who sits in the big chair. And in fact, part of the evolution of monetary policy in an economy like India is it should become less dependent on whoever happens to be the individual. And if you have a kind of scenario where it has to be this one individual in a country of 1.25 billion people, well, that clearly is a problem. Now, in fact, that isn't the case, as we've seen all of these doomsday predictions, these doomsday scenarios that the market would collapse, that the economy was in jeopardy, that billions would exit, and so on, prove not to be the case. The markets took this in their stride. And I would say this, I mean, that what happened was pretty straightforward. A governor's 3-year term came to an end. He was appointed by the previous government. The current government had no obligation to renew his term, and Dr. Rajan, on the other hand, had no obligation to seek a second term or an extension of his term. So that's what happened. His term is expiring in September, and he's going back to Chicago, back to academic life. So all of that is part of one kind of set of conversations. I do want to say this, though, that what created a lot of unease in some quarters, including, I must say, that I shared some of this unease, is that the governor of the central bank is not hired to be a freewheeling public intellectual. He is not a university professor. And in fact, in almost all countries that I know of, and I've studied this across many different countries, the central bank governor is always very careful about what he or she talks about. They speak only about monetary policy, that too in a very guarded way, that too only before or after meetings and so on. They don't broadly speak about political matters, social matters, and so on. They certainly do not directly or indirectly criticize the policies of the government of the day. They don't talk about controversial social issues and so on. Now, everything that Dr. Rajan said in these much publicized speeches about the danger of the tyranny, danger of intolerance in the republic, of the dangers that make in India may not work, and so on. All of this is great if he were a university professor or some kind of public intellectual out there. Right. This is not within his remit as the governor of the central bank. He is, as the governor of the central bank, he or whoever that individual is a public servant, and therefore must behave that way. Maybe my view on this is a bit old-fashioned. There are people out there who say, oh, how great that he was free to speak his mind, but I'm sorry, that's not your job. So Janet Yellen's job is not to go and give a speech about the danger of inequality in America or the danger, the problems faced by minority communities, even though that is a reality of America. She's not going to go out and talk about the problem caused by, say, lax gun control in America. That's not her job. Her job is to administer, is to be the guiding force behind the country's monetary policy, and that's it. And whatever other views you have, then you share those privately with the government. So if Dr. Rajan had a contribution to make to a debate, say, about intolerance, which was one of those kind of debates that flared up and then disappeared, then he perhaps should have found a private channel in which to convey those views. Certainly not something where you want to make a speech about it, which could be misconstrued or could lead to a different interpretation. So that is where some of the concerns cropped up. That yes, he was a terrific manager of India's monetary policy for the 3 years that he was governor, or it will be 3 years when he leaves. But you cannot overlook the fact that he stepped beyond his remit, and that is what caused concern to a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. Just to add something Sanjay Baru had a terrific headline as well on the column saying that the numbers that Rajan did not get were 2014 and 282.
Which is a nice way of saying that, look, which is a point I made perhaps less colorfully, because as you know, headlines are often not written by the writers, is that in a democracy, it is the democratically elected government operating under the constitution of the land that is sovereign. And no individual, no matter how brilliant he or she might be, can step out of that frame, particularly if you're in public life.
And are you saying that the exit of Dr. Rajan is not a threat to Indian democracy?
I am saying it's an affirmation of the way that Indian democracy works, that it all happened according to a rule-governed process. All the rules have been followed. He didn't seek a renewal. The government presumably didn't want to offer him one. That's the way the system works.
No, and this is the thing. This debate about, and Sunanda, I'm coming to you in a second, but what you said about the intolerance debate and the so-called intolerance debate, it has been an affirmation of Indian democracy, because all these people were saying that freedom of expression is under threat on the most watched channels at 9 p.m., getting a platform to completely let it rip against the government. So if democracy is under threat, how is it that everyone's getting a platform everywhere? So that's the thing. So Sunanda, coming to you, and then to Pramod.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of end this by getting this one comment and this sort of Rajan affair by this comment. And Professor Dehejia, you just said that you have studied the institution of central bank governor and you for a while. I just wanted to understand this. Is it normal in Indian context or in Indian international context to sort of make your resignations public like that? This is just for my own knowledge. Because I don't remember any central bank governor doing this, in terms of a blog and putting it out on the RBI website.
Right. No, it's not the norm. I mean, normally it would communicate it officially to the Minister of Finance. Yeah. Minister of Finance perhaps could then share that if he wished. So no, there's nothing normal about the whole exit process. The clamor before it certainly wasn't normal, and his mode of exit also wasn't normal. I mean, if you read the letter, it's not hard, to read between the lines, and not even that much between, that he would have wanted to stay on, or he feels that there's unfinished work, and so on. but no, it's not. This is not the normal way in which you exit as a governor. But then, as you know, as we all know, he's had sort of this rock star profile. So perhaps it's fitting, given the rock star profile, that there'd be a rock star exit as well.
That's wonderfully put, and it's funny that the ones building up the rockstar profile are also the ones arranging for the exit. So, Pramod, would you like to add anything to it before jumping on to the FDI topic?
Well, then he shouldn't choose Chicago. He should choose Nashville if he wants to be a rock.
Now, Chicago has a great jazz and blues scene, as you guys know. So
Yeah.
perhaps Chicago would be a different style of music if that's what he chose to do. But on a more serious note, you know, the University of Chicago is a great institution of higher learning, and I'm sure that freed from being bound by an official government position, you know, Dr. Raj will have a lot of fascinating things to say, and perhaps he'll feel freer to perhaps be more critical and so on of the government if he wants to be, which would be his right as a private citizen and as an academic. I would welcome him joining the group of public intellectuals out there if that's what he wants to do. I think a university like Chicago is a great place to be in and take part in that conversation. But not as, you know, but was a bit out of place as RBI governor.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
We wish him well, and whatever he chooses to do.
Right.
Or perhaps in Rajya Sabha in the near future, because his statements were really lined up to, you know, basically, I don't know if it was political in nature, but it was certainly, you know, well planned. That is what I can gauge.
Right.
Well, I mean, we're entering the realm of speculation. I mean, I know there are some folks out there who think that perhaps he's eyeing an entry into politics in 2019, depending on which way the wind is blowing or which political party might have an interest in him. I don't think it'll be the BJP, is my guess at this point, for pretty obvious reasons. But sure, and you know, and again, if that were the case, that would be great. If he enters the fray as a politician, then the Indian voter, will have a right to judge him or what he says as a politician, and I'd also welcome that.
Absolutely.
Which would also be a great contribution. You know, again, I just come back to this. Rajan as a public intellectual, terrific. Rajan as a would-be politician would be great. Rajan as a central bank governor trying to also be a public intellectual, also make politically charged statements, that was the problem.
Absolutely, I agree. So now I guess from the bang after the Rajan's exit, let's move to the big bang that made the news. The Indian government led, or the Commerce Minister announced a interesting set of reforms on the FDI sector, especially in the defense sector, which a lot of people believe that would boost the Make in India prospects, that it would invite a lot of companies from outside India to, you know, start manufacturing in India. And we wanted to, you know, just have a discussion on that. But what was very interesting, I thought, was that a lot of people were saying that, and so, A.K. Anthony of all the people, about, you know, selling out to the foreign companies and God knows what. So the joke was that would they rather prefer us importing all the time, or at least manufacturing stuff in India as well? So Sunanda, before we go to Vivek, did you have anything to add on to that?
No, I just wanted to say that, you know, before Vivek says anything, is this big bang enough for the people? Because since Modi has come to power, everyone has been talking about these mythical big bang reforms. No one knows what they are. And I think if I can understand, there are two things. Unless you privatize Air India and you privatize railways, I don't think they're going to be happy with the big bang reforms.
Okay,
We know both these things are not going to happen.
Pramod is furiously raising hand as soon as you said privatize Air India. So
I know,
I'm going to get to him.
He has a strong view about that. But what
No,
I'm
not
going to say
I'm
is
I'm raising.
what
I'm
going to
raising
say
the.
is,
I'm going to come to you. You can conclusively rebut Sunanda after that. Hold on.
what I was going to say is that these two things are not going to happen. Short of this, the reforms that were announced earlier and the reforms that were announced yesterday, to me, this makes this government fairly reformist in the Indian context. Sure, we can have more privatization. Sure, we can do more. But as Vivek very eloquently said in the beginning, that, there is something called political economy, and governments have to be sort of conscientious about that. So to me, these were reasonable reforms in Indian context. But I will let Vivek answer if those were
Just
coming in.
1 second, Vivek. I'll allow
Yeah.
Pramod a quick rebuttal on the Air India part before I come to you. So, Pramod, yes, go on.
I was raising Dr. Swami's hand that he doesn't allow me to raise any hand when it comes to privatizing Air India. So if you know what I.
Absolutely. Okay, Vivek, the floor is yours now.
No. I would say, Sananda, I absolutely agree with your very measured, very balanced take on it. There's a political economy of reform which is different from the textbook economics of reform, and in the relevant political economy context, this has been a good set of reforms. Again, it fits the pattern of other sectors. They have raised FDI caps and so on. This fits a pattern of step-by-step, incremental, gradual reforms moving in the right direction. But I agree with your point also, Sananda, that there are going to be people out there who, until there's some major bout of privatization, are not going to be satisfied. Now, I agree with you. I don't see that happening anytime soon. In a sense, every government, every governing party has to set, or does set, I guess, its own red lines in terms of which they want to cross or they don't want to cross. And I think, my own reading of it is, my own sense is that they want to push ahead with the structural reforms, the reforms of the labor market, the capital market, land, and so on. And just, and direct benefit transfer, we haven't talked about. That's been talked about a lot, so won't say more about that. But really, the whole process of making the government-citizen interface function better, make it less of a harassment for the citizen to interact with the state, eliminate corruption where you can. Not possible to do it 100%, by digitizing, by making things electronic, making transfer direct into someone's bank account and so on. All of these things are part of a process of making government function better than it ever has in the history of the Indian Republic. Now, when you have accomplished that task, and that task is still in its early stages, then sure, we can revisit, or this or a future government, whoever they are, can then revisit. Let's then open the question of downsizing the government, increasing the relative importance of the market vis-a-vis the state. But I don't think we have gotten there right now. We have a very creaky state that does way too many things not very well, and just making that work better, I think, clearly is the Modi government's top priority right now.
Interesting. Pramod, anything to add or any points? Yeah.
I'm of the belief that public sector investment and job creation from the public sector at this point in time, with the assets we've got in place, with the reforms that might take for a long period of time to kick in, especially banking reforms with the non-performing assets, private sector job creation cannot be able to replace public sector investments and the kind of impetus that the public sector can give. Dr. Dehejia, what are your thoughts on that?
I think at this point, Pramod, I'm inclined to agree with you that for various reasons, we can talk about them. We don't quite have enough time to get into all of the details, but given the fact that the private investment cycle is still, a little flat, more flat than we would like, public investment, particularly, in infrastructure and so on, has played and is going to play a leading role for the next couple of years for sure. And here again, a pragmatic approach. I have many libertarian friends. I've got libertarian leanings myself, I must confess. But a textbook libertarian approach, when the public sector has to play a role, just doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, I think the government's taking a pragmatic approach. There has to be some combination of the private economy picking up and the government playing some kind of a guiding role in trying to get investment, in particularly infra, back on the rails, if I can put it in those terms. So again, I think what you'll see more of, is a pragmatic, tempered, measured approach. Nothing outlandish, nothing crazy on either one side or the other.
Absolutely. And I know we are running short of time, so I wanted to wrap up the debate with quick closing comments. But just to add to what you said, Vivek, and Sunanda actually wrote a piece on this, on Prime Minister Modi's sense of reform last week. And me and her, we went back and forth about it. That one thing that we both agreed on, that when that Narendra Modi still has elections to win. So even though he's going to attempt reforms, he's going to do with a political context to it. And we came up with a term called a dollop of socialism. So you had the civil aviation policy, great reform, but then the 2,500 rupees cap came, which was the dollop of socialism that everyone was talking about on the 1-hour flight. So before I come to Vivek for closing comments, any closing comments, Pramod?
Well, Vivek ji, has the God-fearing Indian finally taken power at the Prime Minister's office?
I'm gonna wait for Sunanda's closing comments before you respond to that, Vivek. Yes.
Okay. No, my closing comments really, these are just comments and not really question. When we did, as is the norm, you know, people like us and people like me, we are lazy op-ed writers. Unlike academics, we don't, you know, we just get and start writing.
Or
So
we can be lazy as well, though, just to give you a secret, put the secret out there.
you are really going contrarian today, Vivek. But anyway, 90 days appraisal, you know how everyone does this 90-day appraisal. I had also done 90-day appraisal on Prime Minister Modi. And that at that time, and although I have nothing to do with her politics, I had just, you know, sort of taken the term from her. I had called Mr. Modi God of small things. And I had said that he is going to do small, big things versus big, small things. And when I say small, big things, I had said that he is going to do little, small tinkering here, there, and these in the end will probably make a big difference versus doing a big thing, big one splash, and then getting voted out of power as Vivek, and we won't have time to talk about it, so we have to call him again about his wonderful book, Indianomics, and they've talked about the elections in which Vajpayee was you know, Vajpayee had to was elected out. So Vivek has to promise to come back and talk about that.
Yes, we need to get both Vivek and Rupa for the Indianomics debate.
What I was going to say is we're not going. He is not going to do something. He's not going to sacrifice his political power at the altar of reform. But that does not mean he will not do reform. That is something he is, as I said, he's going to be a god of small things. He's going to do small things which may lead up to the big thing.
Before you come in, Vivek, that's the second Arundhati reference that Sunanda has made this week. I don't think she likes her viewership on the upswing. She probably wants to bring it down by a few notches.
Well, I suspect that she might not be the most enthusiastic about your appropriation of her term. But I think it's to describe Mr. Modi's policy sort of model. But I think, yes, it is appropriate. And absolutely, look, politicians want to get reelected. This is not something that should surprise anyone. And so therefore, any reforms agenda has to be within the template of, look, we would like to do the best we can. But of course, we want to have a shot at being re-elected in 2019, which politician doesn't want to be. And we have to look at the lessons right or wrong, from you know, what has gone before us. And you know, we should certainly have a second conversation about this, you know, some other time. But 2004 seemed to give the lesson that perhaps NDA 1 appeared to focus too much on, you know, on the big picture, on the economy, too much on a range of good economic policies, which in the end, I think it was really bad luck, but didn't get rewarded by the voters. So that context and that history is relevant here. And Mr. Modi and even his, you know, critics and those who don't, you know, especially like him, would have to agree that he's a consummate politician. He's a highly successful politician who's never lost an election. He's contested and so on. So I think what you will see is reforms moving ahead, moving incrementally, moving in a measured and a tempered way, and in a way that Mr. Modi himself, who is the ultimate judge of what he sees fit to do would be looking towards 2019, and that's a perfectly reasonable way, I think, to see how the next couple of years will go forward.
Excellent. So according to Vivek, and I think we all agree on this, that the next 3 years probably, rather than just economics, it's going to be pragmatic economics that's going to rule the roost. So we'll have to wait and see. And about reforming government institutions or government relics, Shekhar Gupta had one very interesting term 2-3 years ago about ITDC. He called it the Indian Tourism Disaster Corporation when Congress was in power. So let's hope institutions like that get reformed extremely soon.
I wouldn't hold your breath, but let's see what happens.
Let's see, exactly. I know. So something for us to look forward to for our next discussion. But we thank you for joining us, Vivek. This was a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. It was great to be with all of you. It was a real pleasure, and thanks for having me on the show. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel on Mind Makers. We'll be back with many more of these fascinating debates soon. This is Adit Kapadia, Sananda, and Pramod signing off. Thank you.